Okay, let's just jump right into this. Today, we're doing an explainer on a chilling 40-year-old cold case that literally stunned a small city in Iowa. I mean, we're talking about a story of unimaginable tragedy, generations of relentless police work, and a mystery that was ultimately cracked by some seriously revolutionary forensic science. It's wild to think about, but this is a case that sat on ice for decades, haunting an entire community until science finally caught up with a killer who thought for sure he'd gotten away with it forever. So, to really wrap our heads around the massive scale of frustration investigators faced, we have to go back to a brutally cold December night in 1979 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. You see, for decades, police swabbed over 100 different people, basically just chasing ghosts. The investigators literally felt like they were looking for a needle in an endless haystack, just agonizingly waiting for the day they might finally get lucky. 13 long years passed before they even had a real suspect. And at the absolute center of this tragedy was 18-year-old high school senior Michelle Martinko. By all accounts from her friends, she was bright, she was kind, and she was this striking, beautiful concert choir member. On the evening of December 19th, 1979, right after a choir banquet, Michelle drove to the newly opened Westdale Mall to shop for a new winter coat. It was the bright, bustling place to be in Cedar Rapids back then. She left the mall shortly before it closed at 10 p.m., walked out alone into this freezing, pitch-black parking lot, and she never made it home. The sheer brutality of the crime scene police found the next morning inside her car was, honestly, it was staggering. 29. That's the number of times Michelle had been stabbed and cut. And this is absolutely crucial, the evidence showed that this was a fierce, terrifying fight. Michelle fought back with everything she had, sustaining really deep defensive wounds. The attacker definitely came prepared, leaving behind indentations from rubber gloves on both the outside and inside of the car. But because Michelle fought so fiercely, the killer actually cut himself, leaving his own blood mixed right in with hers, directly on the car's gear shift. Now, despite having a totally blood-soaked crime scene, you have to remember DNA technology didn't really exist yet. So police had to chase down every logical angle they could think of. They looked closely at Andy Siddell, a possessive ex-boyfriend, but, well, he had a solid alibi from his mom. Then they looked at another ex, Mike Warrick, but he was safely over 100 miles away at college. They even explored stranger theories, like, was it a botched robbery? But her $186 in cash and her newly bought clothes were left completely untouched in the car. Eventually, the leads simply dried up, and the killer seemingly vanished into thin air. This kicked off an agonizing wait for the community. By 1986, the investigation had gone completely cold. Fast forward, and a massive breakthrough happens in 2005. Detective Doug Larison, who by the way actually went to high school with Michelle, was reviewing these dusty old case files, and he discovered something huge. Decades earlier, someone had taken blood scrapings from the gear shift, but the results had just been sitting there in the file. He immediately sent those scrapings, along with a spot of blood found on Michelle's dress, to a modern lab. And guess what? They yielded a full male DNA profile. They finally had the killer's genetic fingerprint. What's really fascinating here is how this case became a sort of poetic generational passing of the baton. Back in 1979, Detective Harvey Denlinger walked that gruesome crime scene at the Westdale Mall, completely unable to find the answers. Well, fast forward 36 years to 2015, and his son, Detective Matt Denlinger, actually takes over as lead investigator on the exact same cold case. Matt was absolutely determined to sit down with his dad and finally put a name to the phantom who would terrorize their city for nearly 4 decades. Then, in 2018, everything changed. You probably remember when news broke that the notorious Golden State Killer had been caught using this revolutionary technique called genetic genealogy, right? Well, Detective Matt Denlinger realized this was exactly the tool they needed. So he partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, taking that male DNA profile from Michelle's dress and running it through a public voluntary DNA database called GEDmatch. They were just hoping to find even a distant relative of their elusive suspect. And you guys, the science worked flawlessly. They got a quick hit on a woman named Brandy Jennings out in Washington State, who turned out to be a second cousin once removed to the killer. So, by meticulously pulling birth records, marriage certificates, and even gravestone records, investigators rapidly built out an expansive family tree, stretching all the way back to her great-great-grandparents. As more relatives were tested, the genetic puzzle systematically and swiftly narrowed down to just 3 men: Donald, Kenneth, and Jerry Burns. 3 brothers, all living right there in Iowa. Okay, so now police had to test the brothers, but they obviously couldn't risk tipping them off. So they set up this covert operation, literally killing the men to collect incredibly mundane, everyday objects they threw away. I mean, from Donald, they grabbed a discarded drinking straw. From Kenneth, they pulled a used toothbrush right out of the garbage. And from Jerry, they snagged a soda glass he drank from at a local pizza joint. When the lab results came back, investigators were left absolutely speechless. Jerry Burns was an exact DNA match. What's so crazy about this is the jarring disconnect between the bloodthirsty monster everyone imagined and the reality of who Jerry Burns actually was. For 40 years, everyone just assumed the killer would have this massive, violent criminal record, or at least some direct connection to Michelle Tomeo. Instead, they found Jerry, a totally normal, respected local businessman, married with 3 kids, and with absolutely zero criminal history. There was no connection whatsoever between him and the 18-year-old girl in that mall parking lot. Now, Detective Dunlinger didn't just walk up and arrest him right away. Engaging in a bit of psychological warfare, he strategically chose to interrogate Burns at his business on December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years to the day after Michelle was murdered. He really wanted to rattle him. And while Burns casually admitted to having visited that mall in the past, he flatly denied the murder. But here's the thing. When Denlinger pressed him on the undeniable science, asking how on earth his DNA ended up mixed with Michelle's blood at the crime scene, Burns simply couldn't offer a single plausible explanation. But here's the thing. When the case finally went to trial in February 2020, it turned into this incredibly intense analytical battle over DNA interpretation. The defense argued that the DNA presence was just a circumstantial transfer. They suggested, maybe it happened casually in the mall food court, or perhaps because Jerry's brother worked at a Buick dealership, somehow transferring his DNA to Michelle's Buick. But the prosecution shut that down hard, pointing straight to a 1 in 100 billion DNA match. They forcefully argued that Michelle actually solved her own murder by fighting so fiercely that she forced her killer to bleed right onto the gear shift, permanently cementing his guilt. Despite all the defense's theories about innocent DNA transfer and how highly improbable for a family man to commit such a random crime, the science really just spoke for itself. It took the jury a mere 3 hours of deliberation to cut through 40 years of mystery. Just 3 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree. It was this moment of profound, breathtaking closure for Michelle's friends, her family, and the multiple generations of detectives who flat out refused to ever give up on her. As we wrap up this explainer, we're really left with a final, chilling thought that lingers long after the gavel is dropped. See, during his police interrogation, seemingly out of nowhere, Jerry Burns name-dropped Jody Heisentrut. She was a well-known Iowa news anchor who vanished without a trace back in 1995, just 2 hours from where Burns lived. While police haven't directly connected him to her case, seeing a seemingly normal businessman exposed as a brutal killer leaves us with a terrifying question. What other dark, unimaginable secrets might Jerry Burns be taking with him to prison?